The wedding venue had been chosen for its quiet beauty, a restored garden estate tucked away from the noise of the city, where white roses climbed old stone walls and soft lights hung like stars between tall oak trees. It was meant to be a place where love could feel timeless, untouched by the stress and cruelty of the outside world. For months, every detail had been planned with care, not just to celebrate two people, but to honor the families and sacrifices that had led them to that moment. The bride had dreamed of this day through years of struggle. She had grown up watching her parents fight through hardship, learning early that love was not just something that happened, but something that had to be protected. Every flower placed in the venue had been chosen not for extravagance, but for meaning. Each ribbon tied around a chair was a small symbol of hope, of beauty created through patience and perseverance. The groom carried a similar story of endurance. His life had been shaped by long hours of work and quiet determination, building a future that could hold the woman he loved. Together, they had saved every spare dollar, cutting back on comforts so they could afford a wedding that reflected not wealth, but heart. For them, this ceremony was not about showing off. It was about showing gratitude for how far they had come. By the morning of the wedding, the venue glowed with gentle elegance. A floral arch framed the altar, handcrafted centerpieces filled the tables, and soft pastel fabrics draped across the chairs like whispers of joy. Volunteers from both families had worked late into the night, pouring their love into every detail. There was laughter, tired smiles, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that something beautiful had been created together. Then there was her. The woman arrived early, long before most of the guests, her heels clicking sharply against the stone path that led into the garden. She was dressed in a way that demanded attention, her posture rigid with entitlement. To those who had never met her, she might have looked like just another guest. But to the people who knew her, she was something else entirely. She carried herself with the belief that the world existed to serve her, and when it didn't, she made sure everyone felt her displeasure. She was the groom's aunt by marriage, known throughout the family for her sharp tongue and her constant need to control every situation. At past gatherings, she had found fault with everything from the food to the seating arrangements. No one had dared to challenge her, not because she was right, but because confronting her was exhausting. Over the years, people had learned that it was easier to let her complain than to risk becoming the next target. As she walked into the venue, her eyes scanned the decorations with a critical glare. Instead of seeing the care and love that had gone into each detail, she saw only opportunities to judge. The colors were wrong in her mind. The flowers were too simple. The arrangement did not match her taste. And in her world, that made it unacceptable. She did not hesitate. Without asking anyone, without caring who had created the decorations, she began to move through the space like a storm. Her hands brushed against centerpieces, nudging them out of place. Her heels caught the edges of carefully laid fabrics, pulling them loose. Each small act of disruption was deliberate, driven by a desire to reshape the wedding into something that suited her vision. At first, the volunteers thought it was an accident. A flower vase tipped slightly. A ribbon slipped off a chair. But as the pattern continued, it became impossible to ignore. The woman was not making mistakes. She was dismantling something that had taken months to build. The bride's sister noticed first. She had been adjusting a row of chairs when she saw the woman yank a decorative bough from one of them, tossing it aside as if it were trash. Shock froze her in place. This was not just decoration. It was a piece of someone's dream. That bough had been tied by the bride herself, her fingers aching as she worked late into the night, determined to make everything perfect. As the woman continued, her destruction became bolder. A centerpiece was knocked over, petals scattering across the ground. A delicate floral arrangement was pulled apart, its beauty reduced to a mess of stems and broken blossoms. With each careless motion, she erased hours of work and layers of meaning. The atmosphere in the garden began to change. What had been a place of joyful anticipation now felt heavy with disbelief and growing anger. People watched in stunned silence, unsure of how to respond. It was a wedding day, after all. No one wanted to cause a scene. But the woman's actions were already doing that, quietly but effectively. Inside the nearby building, the groom was preparing, unaware of what was happening outside. He was thinking about the future, about the life he was about to start, about the woman who had stood by him through everything. He had no idea that the peace of that moment was about to be shattered by someone who believed her opinions mattered more than anyone else's happiness. The woman's husband, a quiet man who often stayed in her shadow, had followed her into the venue. He had seen her behavior before, had felt the weight of her constant need to dominate. But something about this moment felt different. This was not just another family gathering. This was a sacred day for two people who had earned every bit of joy they were about to receive. He watched her tear apart the decorations. Something inside him shifted. He saw not just the flowers being destroyed, but the hearts behind them. He saw the years of sacrifice, the love that had gone into creating this moment, being trampled by his wife's ego. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the urge to speak a truth that had been buried beneath years of silence. The bride, still unaware, was finishing her preparations, surrounded by family and friends who were trying to keep her calm and happy. Outside, however, the scene was unraveling. The woman's actions had drawn attention from more guests, and the murmurs of confusion and anger were growing louder. What began as a few displaced decorations was quickly becoming a symbol of something much deeper. It was a reminder of how easily one person's cruelty could overshadow another's joy. But it was also setting the stage for something unexpected, something that would turn the chaos into a moment of truth. The woman stood among the scattered petals and broken arrangements. Her husband took a step forward, his face reflecting a mix of guilt, resolve, and long-held frustration. The weight of everything he had kept inside was pressing against him, and it was about to come out in a way no one could ignore. The wedding day, once planned to be a celebration of love, was now on the brink of becoming a revelation that would change everything. The first chapter ends here, just as the tension reaches its peak and the husband prepares to confess the truth that will shake the entire wedding. The garden, once filled with soft laughter and gentle anticipation, now stood in uneasy silence. The scattered petals on the ground looked like the aftermath of a storm, each one a reminder of how quickly something beautiful could be broken. Guests hovered at the edges of the space, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort, as they watched the woman stand in the middle of the destruction she had created. Yet she seemed unaffected, her posture still rigid with self-importance, as if she had merely corrected a flaw rather than caused a wound. Her husband, however, could no longer ignore what was happening. For years, he had lived beside her temper, absorbing the sharp edges of her words and the way she treated others as obstacles rather than people. He had convinced himself that keeping the peace was the same as doing what was right. But in this moment, surrounded by evidence of her cruelty, that lie could no longer survive. The weight of everything he had held inside pressed heavily against his chest. He saw the bride's family members struggling not to cry as they tried to salvage what they could. He saw volunteers quietly picking up fallen flowers, their movements slow and defeated. This was not just about decorations. It was about dignity, about respect, about the simple right to celebrate love without being torn down by someone else's ego. And then the truth, long buried, began to rise. The man had known for years that his wife's need to control and belittle others came from a place of deep insecurity. Behind her loud criticism was a fear of being insignificant, of being seen as ordinary. To compensate, she had built herself a persona that demanded attention and obedience. He had watched her manipulate situations, rewrite stories, and turn herself into the victim whenever she was challenged. But there was more. Much more. He carried with him the knowledge of things she had hidden from everyone, including the family whose wedding she was now destroying. Secrets that, if revealed, would explain why she had always been so desperate to assert her power. He had kept those secrets to protect her, believing that loyalty meant silence. Yet silence had allowed her to keep hurting people. Standing there, he realized that by protecting her lies, he had become part of the harm. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing. He no longer wanted to be the quiet shadow following her chaos. He wanted to be someone who did not turn away from truth, even when it was uncomfortable. The wedding, meant to be a symbol of love and honesty, had become the perfect place for that truth to finally come into the light. As guests gathered closer, drawn by the tension in the air, the woman continued to fuss over the decorations, convinced that her interference was justified. She had no idea that the foundation of her carefully constructed image was about to crack. The husband felt a strange calm wash over him. The fear that had kept him silent for so long was losing its grip. He knew that what he was about to reveal would change how everyone saw his wife, but he also knew that it was necessary. Lies, like broken flowers, could only be hidden for so long before their damage became impossible to ignore. He began to move toward the center of the garden, his presence finally commanding attention. Guests turned their heads, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even the woman paused for a moment, her expression flickering with annoyance at being interrupted. The husband's heart pounded, but his resolve was steady. He thought about all the people she had humiliated over the years, all the moments he had watched from the sidelines, wishing he had the courage to speak. This wedding was not just a turning point for the bride and groom. It was becoming a turning point for him as well. The truth he carried was not small. It was not something that could be brushed off or ignored. It was the kind of truth that reshaped relationships, that forced people to confront who they really were. And once it was spoken, there would be no going back. The bride's family, sensing the shift, stopped what they were doing. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed to fade into nothing, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The man's gaze was fixed on his wife, not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness. He had loved her once, and maybe part of him still did, but he could no longer love the lies that had defined their life together. He was about to expose the pattern of manipulation, the hidden actions that had allowed her to always escape responsibility. The wedding guests, unaware of the full scope of what was coming, felt the tension tighten like a knot. Outside the garden, the sky remained bright, oblivious to the emotional storm gathering below. But within the space framed by broken decorations and scattered petals, a reckoning was about to begin. The woman, still convinced of her own righteousness, had no idea that the truth her husband was carrying would unravel everything she had worked so hard to control. The day she tried to dominate was becoming the day she would finally be seen for who she truly was. And as the husband took another step forward, ready to release the weight of years of silence, the wedding transformed from a celebration into a moment of raw honesty that would echo far beyond that garden. The second chapter ends here, just as the husband is about to reveal the secrets that will change the course of the wedding and everyone involved. The air in the garden felt heavier than the storm clouds that sometimes gathered over the estate, even though the sky above remained bright and clear. Everyone present could sense that something irreversible was about to unfold. The scattered decorations, once symbols of celebration, now looked like evidence in a silent trial. Each fallen flower and torn ribbon seemed to whisper of the damage that had already been done, not just to the wedding, but to the fragile balance holding the family together. The husband stood at the center of it all, his quiet demeanor transformed into something firm and resolute. Years of suppressed truth weighed on him, yet there was also relief in finally allowing that burden to surface. The woman he had married had always commanded attention with her sharp opinions and loud presence, but in this moment, it was his silence breaking that demanded the most notice. As the truth began to unfold, it did not arrive gently. It came in waves of realization that washed over the guests, revealing a long history of manipulation, hidden actions, and carefully crafted lies. The man's confession was not just about what she had done to the wedding. It was about a pattern that had stretched back through years of family gatherings, business dealings, and personal relationships. People learned how she had twisted stories to make herself look like the victim, how she had quietly sabotaged others when they threatened to outshine her, how she had used her husband's loyalty as a shield, letting him take the emotional weight of her behavior while she continued unchecked. The truth was not dramatic in the way of shouting or accusations. It was devastating in its clarity. With every revelation, the image she had built of herself began to crack. The confident posture she wore like armor no longer held the same power. Guests who had once nodded along to her complaints now saw them for what they were, tools of control. Family members who had once excused her behavior as personality quirks realized how deeply it had hurt those around her. The bride, hearing everything, felt a mix of heartbreak and validation. She had sensed the woman's hostility from the beginning, but she had never imagined the depth of what lay beneath it. The destruction of her wedding decorations was no longer just an act of rudeness. It was the culmination of years of unresolved bitterness and jealousy. The groom, standing beside her, felt anger rise, not only for the ruined decor, but for the way his family had been manipulated for so long. The woman had always positioned herself as someone who knew best, someone who deserved to be obeyed. Now that illusion was dissolving, replaced by the raw truth of who she really was. The husband's confession was not meant to humiliate her, though it did expose her. It was meant to free everyone from the web of deception she had spun. In speaking out, he was also freeing himself. The years he had spent protecting her lies had slowly eroded his own sense of integrity. This moment, painful as it was, felt like the first honest breath he had taken in a long time. The woman's reaction was immediate and intense. Her face, once filled with superiority, twisted with a mixture of shock and rage. She had not expected to be confronted, especially not in such a public way. Her world was built on the belief that she could control every narrative. Now that control was slipping through her fingers, but the guests were no longer looking at her with fear or resignation. They were looking with clarity. They saw the patterns in her behavior reflected in the stories her husband had shared. They recognized the familiar feeling of being belittled, of being made to feel small. The truth had given them a lens through which everything suddenly made sense. The wedding, once threatened by her actions, was now being protected by something far stronger than decorations: honesty. The bride's tears, which had been held back through the chaos, now fell not just for what was lost, but for the justice unfolding before her. Her special day had been nearly destroyed, but in its place was emerging a powerful reminder of why she had chosen to marry someone who valued truth and kindness. The man's confession continued, not in anger, but in a steady recounting of reality. Each detail peeled back another layer of the woman's carefully maintained persona. It was not cruel. It was necessary. And as the truth took root, the woman's ability to deny it weakened. The garden, once tense with uncertainty, began to feel something new. It was not joy yet, but it was relief. The kind of relief that comes when a long-hidden wound is finally cleaned. Even if it still hurts, by the time the man finished, there was no doubt left about who the woman truly was. The guests no longer saw her as a powerful figure to be feared, but as someone whose own insecurities had driven her to hurt others. The broken decorations could be fixed. Flowers could be replaced. But something far more important had been restored: the dignity of the people she had tried to control. And as the truth settled over the garden like a calm after a storm, the final chapter of this emotional reckoning was ready to begin. The third chapter ends here, as the truth has been fully revealed and the consequences are about to unfold. The garden no longer felt like the same place it had been just hours earlier. Where tension and disbelief had once filled the air, there was now a quiet, heavy stillness. It was the kind of stillness that follows a powerful storm, when everything has been stripped down to what is real. The truth had done its work, and nothing could go back to the way it was before. The woman stood in the center of the chaos she had created, not just in the decorations, but in the hearts of everyone around her. The image she had so carefully built over the years had collapsed. Her sharp words, her constant need to dominate, her habit of turning every situation into a reflection of herself were now seen for what they were. No one was looking at her with admiration anymore. They were looking with understanding, and that was far more unsettling for someone who thrived on control. Her husband, though emotionally drained, felt lighter than he had in years. By choosing truth over silence, he had broken a cycle that had trapped them both. He no longer had to carry the weight of her secrets or shield her from the consequences of her actions. Whatever happened next, he knew it would be built on honesty, not fear. The bride and groom, surrounded by family and friends, began to feel the day slowly reclaim its meaning. Yes, the decorations were damaged, and the moment they had envisioned had been interrupted. But what unfolded instead was something just as powerful. The wedding had become a symbol not just of love, but of courage, of standing up for what is right even when it is difficult. Volunteers stepped forward, quietly and gently, to begin fixing what they could. Fallen flowers were gathered. Ribbons were retied. Each small act of repair felt like a promise that beauty could still rise from what had been broken. The bride watched with tears in her eyes, not just from sadness, but from gratitude. She was not alone. Her community was standing with her. The woman's actions, meant to assert dominance, had backfired in the most profound way. Instead of bending the wedding to her will, she had exposed herself. Instead of ruining the day, she had revealed the strength of the people she had tried to hurt. The karma was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable. Guests who had once avoided conflict now felt a sense of closure. They no longer had to pretend everything was fine. The truth had freed them from that burden. The wedding, once threatened, was now becoming a place of healing. The husband, standing among the family he had nearly lost to silence, felt the weight of regret, but also the possibility of redemption. His confession had not just changed how others saw his wife. It had changed how he saw himself. He had chosen courage over comfort, and that choice mattered. As the ceremony preparations resumed, there was a renewed sense of purpose in every movement. This wedding was no longer just about two people starting a life together. It was about everyone choosing honesty, compassion, and respect over control and cruelty. The woman, for the first time in a long while, was forced to confront the consequences of her behavior. There was no crowd to impress, no narrative to twist. Only the reality of what she had done and the people she had hurt. Whether she chose to change was something only time would reveal, but the truth had been planted. The bride and groom finally stood ready, not in the perfect setting they had imagined, but in something far more meaningful. They stood in a place that had been tested and still held love. That was the foundation they had always wanted. As the soft music began again and the guests took their seats, the garden felt transformed. Not because everything was fixed, but because something deeper had been set right. The wedding could go on, not as a performance, but as a celebration of everything that truly mattered. And so, in a space once torn apart by selfishness, love found its way back, stronger than before. The day that had nearly been destroyed became a story of resilience, truth, and the quiet power of doing what is right. The woman had come to control, but she left having revealed more than she ever intended. And in that revelation, everyone else found something far more valuable: freedom. The story ends here, with a wedding saved not by perfection, but by honesty, courage, and the enduring strength of love.